We're here to idea everyone, to fire up your curiosity and connect you with the people and ideas that shape our world. Watch, listen, understand, connect, create. Let's move the human story forward together.
Hello and welcome to The Poetry of Science, a podcast which provides insight into new scientific research via the medium of poetry. I'm your host, Dr. Sam Illingworth, and each week I'll be introducing you to some of the latest scientific findings and sharing a selection of science-themed poetry. After all, we could all do with a little bit more poetry in our lives. In this episode, I'll be exploring new research which has found that climate change will likely lead to irreversible declines in freshwater storage in the Tibetan Plateau by the middle of this century, impacting the supply of fresh water for nearly 2 billion people. You stand as the roof of the world, granting flowing gifts of streams and lakes and life. Hemmed in by rugged paths, your body creaks with ridges, crests and faults. Beneath each fold a precious line to parched and weary throngs below. Their muted songs of praise smothered in the smoke that dries your skin and cracks your kindness. Until the day there are no gifts to give. This poem is inspired by recent research published in Nature Climate, which has found that the Tibetan Plateau will experience significant water loss this century due to global warming. The reservoirs of the Tibetan Plateau, which covers most of southern China and northern India, are known as the water tower of Asia. Fed by monsoons, they currently supply fresh water for nearly 2 billion people who live downstream, providing irrigation, drinking water and hydropower. However, despite its importance, the plateau's complex terrain has meant that the impacts of climate change on past and future terrestrial water storage, which includes all the above and below ground water in the region, have largely been underexplored. In this new study, researchers used satellite and ground-based measurements of water mass in glaciers, lakes and below-ground sources, combined with modelling using machine learning techniques to provide a benchmark of observed changes in terrestrial water storage over the past 2 decades, from 2002 to 2020. They then used this to project what will happen in the next 4 decades, 2021 to 2060, based on a range of future climate change scenarios. The study found that climate change since the start of this century has already led to severe water depletion in certain areas of the Tibetan Plateau, likely due to the competing effects of glacier retreat and the degradation of seasonally frozen ground. In a business-as-usual scenario, i.e. one in which we fail to significantly reduce fossil fuel burning, there will be nearly a 100% loss of water availability to downstream regions in the Tibetan Plateau by the middle of this century. As such, this research highlights that substantial adaptation to decreasing water resources will be required in this vulnerable and highly populated region of the world. Now that you've heard the science, let me read the poem to you again. You stand as the roof of the world, granting flowing gifts of streams and lakes and life. Hemmed in by rugged paths, your body creaks with ridges, crests and faults. Beneath each fold a precious line to parched and weary throngs below. Their muted songs of praise smothered in the smoke that dries your skin and cracks your kindness, until the day there are no gifts to give. In this section of the podcast, I'd like to share a poem written by another poet on a topic related to the science that has been discussed so far. In this episode, I'll be reading Water Table by Eliza Griswold. Eliza Griswold is an American poet and reporter whose work has appeared in The New Yorker, The Atlantic, The New York Times Magazine, Harper's, and The New Republic. Her books include the poetry collection Wide Awake Field, published in 2007, and the non-fiction title The 10th Parallel, published in 2010. In 2010, Griswold won the Rome Prize from the American Academy in Rome for her poetry, and in 2011, The 10th Parallel received the Anthony J. Lucas Award. Water Table, by Eliza Griswold. My earliest wish was not to exist, to burst in the backyard without violence, no blood, no fleshy bits, mute button pressed alone behind the rectory where no one would see me. This wasn't a plea to be found or mourned for, but to be unborn into the atmosphere, to hang in the humid air as ponds vent upward from the overheated earth, rise until they freeze and crystallize, then drop into the aquifer. Thank you for listening to The Poetry of Science.
Thank you very much for being with us for this episode of the ideaXme Show. ideaXme is a global platform. Our mission is to move the human story forward by sharing knowledge of the future. You can find us on all major audio networks at www.radioideaXme.com, on YouTube and Vimeo. Please subscribe.